for tonight. Immigration 101, no human is a legal call. If you haven't already, please be sure to drop your name and city in the chat, as well as what you're hoping to learn today. My name is Christian Hernandez. I am based in North Texas, and I'm on the coaching team of the International Migrant Rights Working Group, which is part of the International Committee of the Democratic Socialists of America. The IMRWG is the group and team who's hosting this call that you're on tonight. Before we get started, we are going to launch a quick poll since we unfortunately don't have time for, over 100 introductions. We want to know just who's here. So let us know if you're either a member of DSA, either in a chapter or maybe at large. If you are in DSA elected leadership, welcome. Or if you're not yet a DSA member, I want to give us a few more seconds for y'all to respond. All right. Thanks, everybody. It looks like, we've got a large number of DSA members, but we also have a number of non-DSA members, so welcome. We will be asking you to join all throughout the call. But I want to thank everyone here for being a member of DSA and for the small percentage of folks who are not. I do hope that by the end of the call, you'll see the importance of being a member of DSA, the importance of organization in service of the issue that brings us together tonight, which of course is immigration. I do want to take a few moments to start our call in remembrance to honor Jocelyn Carranza, who is an 11-year-old Texas girl whose life was cut short, both due to the bullying she endured at the hands of her classmates, who taunted her by saying ICE would take away her parents. And of course, because of the broader political climate that this current administration and previous ones have put a target not only on the millions of people who live in this country without documentation, but all of those people who love them, their children, their parents, their friends, their neighbors, their coworkers. I'm here, and I'm certain that you're here because you know that racism and hate and fear are not tools that we will ever pick up, that we all deserve more, and that people are fundamentally worth fighting for. The system can be beat because it's not indestructible. It's held up by people with names and faces. Some of them you may or may not know, but you'll learn about them more on this call. And I hope tonight really reinforces why we are here and helps us commit to a liberatory fight for Jocelyn and for so many others who are no longer with us. Now, I'm going to pass it over to Comrade Defa, who is going to take us through an overview of the current political moment and the narratives, propaganda, and systems that we're up against.
Thank you so much, Christian. I have so many feelings right now. I'm first of all so thankful for all of the people in the International Committee and in the Immigration Working Group that have worked in so much solidarity and strength to be able to build this program and be able to build this call that we're going to be engaging with today. I also want to thank you for being here and recognizing that knowledge is incredibly an incredibly important step into this work. I myself was born in Bogota, Colombia. I am an immigrant, but I am a documented immigrant in a high level of privilege. And at the same time, there are a lot of things that I continue to learn every day about immigration. So the fact is that whether we are or not immigrants in the US, we are in stolen land. And so it is important that we share vocabulary, and it is important that we hold each other in space and create community through political education and through understanding the political moment. So we're going to start today talking about relevant vocabulary. There's so much jargon that happens in all spaces, and immigration is not an exception to that. So to be in the same page when we talk about ICE, immigration detainers, these are the people that request to have individuals held for transfer to deportation and create proceedings directly to put them into local custody. 287G or MOU is an authorizing U.S. immigration and customs enforcement that creates the authority of enforcement officers to perform immigration, sorry, functions, holds or warrants, and under the agency direction and oversight contracts, memorandums of understanding. So this is the enforcement and particular specified immigration functions within the system of detention. Refugee is someone that is seeking protections, that is fleeing their home country. An asylum seeker or asylee is someone that is seeking protection, fleeing, but is already in another country. So refugee is someone that is trying to get to another country and be safe. The asylum is the person that is already in the other place. LPRs are the legal permanent residents. TPS and DACA are the TPS is the temporary protected status and deferred action for childhood arrivals. And these two programs provide deportation protection and work authorization. The TPS designations are done by DHS in different intervals of time. And DACA is an example of prosecutorial, like a process that is a discretion program that has to be renewed every so often. And in this case, as we know, it is every 2 years. And a mixed status household is where families have members in various status. So maybe there is citizens, birthright citizens, there is undocumented citizens, or asylum folks in the same household. So these are some of the relevant vocabulary. This is some of the relevant vocabulary that we're gonna be seeing towards the call, and that we see in the everyday conversations about immigration. So it's really important that we understand these as we are starting to be or have been in the work. One of the things that happens when we are doing immigration work is that there are a lot of narratives, and I wanted to invite everyone in the call to think about and maybe share in the chat some of the negative narratives that you see every day, harmful narratives, misinformation that you're hearing, and we're gonna talk. I'm gonna share a little bit about those. So we're gonna go to the next slide. These are not all of them. We know that racism has been a long-lasting weapon of violence against many communities, and these are some of the ones that we have seen are more often or not in our spaces, but we are really excited to hear a lot more than that to hear from you. Drain on the economy rather than boosting in the economy. Exactly. That is the exact type of narrative that we hear, that is a narrative of separation and anger and violence from one another, while people are holding power and exploiting all of us while we are holding powers against each other. So breaking the law by being here, that is absolutely not true. There is a constitutional right to be here. There is the earth is not a place, like everyone has the right to a dignified life, and so that is absolutely not a good narrative. Why don't they just get in line? I personally, in my lived experience, I had a union job where people would be like, oh, you came here the right way, or why is it that not everyone can be like you? And those are like really incredible negative narratives, and these are the moments in which it's not only that we hear them and we're like, oh, that's wrong, but we need to do active intervention in the conversations that we're having with folks that are maybe saying this. And they might be good people. My union brothers and sisters were incredibly sweet people, but they had never had an interaction with someone like me. And then through the years, we built a relationship to where at this point they don't say, or they don't see the need to use this type of harmful narratives. Immigration is a Latino issue. Absolutely not. Immigration is so complex and it affects so many layers of so many positions. Yes, Valeria, immigrants are criminals is an incredible, harmful, and it's a type of violence that is posted upon a lot of our communities and has been a really strong talking point in the community. So the most important part about confronting misinformation and harmful narratives is that it will happen, it will continue to happen, and all we have is our voices and our knowledge, and having direct intervention with kindness and trying to organize people into moving away from them is incredibly important part of the work that we're doing. And so let's make sure that we are challenging ourselves to be able to show up and intervene in these cases. In the current political moment, these harmful narratives are feeding this narrative that is not new. We know that none of this is new. We know that this has been happening since before colonization and has only gotten stronger as the contradiction of imperialism and capitalism is growing. But we really need to think about, like, where are we at right now, right? What is the moment that we're in? What does this moment look like? It looks like ice-filled offices in many places, creation of more detention centers, and creation of more contracts for detention centers across the country and across the world. DHS agencies and defunding our support services, because when the support services get defunded, that money goes into funding our incarceration. Who are the architects of this latest round of attacks? We know Stephen Miller, who was the author of the Muslim ban, is at the forefront of this. Tom Homan, who is the border Caesar and wants to come to Boston and fight us, and we're like, yeah, let's go. And he's a proponent of zero tolerance policies and contributor to the Heritage Foundation project in 2025, and possibly himself an immigrant. But, you know, this is not about being an immigrant or not. This is really about power exploitation and violation of human rights. And so that's why Tom Homan is called the border Caesar. And what we can expect is pressure, trying to make us enforce things that might not even be real or are not real. As a matter of fact, we have seen that over and over again. Homan says, I will run the biggest deportation force this country has ever seen. They ain't see shit yet. Wait until 2025. We have seen colonization as immigrants, as people of color, as folks that have been in the front lines of trying to recover our stolen land, and we are going to fight back. And so we can expect them to do this, but we also have to maintain the strength of knowing that we can fight together. And that's how we stop it. We stop them from accessing our local infrastructures. We create our local infrastructures. We support the existing local infrastructures. We add to the operational and legal challenges, and we continue to create constructive organizing in the basis of solidarity and love with our community members. There is a particular change in the locations that this is happening at in this particular 2.0 administration with Donald Trump. Can we please go to the next slide? And there are attacks that are being particularly moved through executive orders that can be turned over eventually or not. But that we know that even just the fact that they get done has an impact on how we can move through the work. And it sets us back from the liberation work, right? The moment that people fall in fear, the moment that people get detained, even if they should not be detained, which is every person, nobody should be detained. We are falling behind in the work of liberation for our land and our people. And so seeing anti-immigrant attacks and attacks on all of us, and some of those attacks are the Laken-Riley Act, the termination of the TPS program, trying to make Guantanamo Bay a deportation and detention center, incrementing ICE capacity, and the 13 executive orders in the first 2 days of the Trump administration. Next slide, please. With that comes, like, when the executive orders are happening, there's of course a lot of rippling effects to that. And some of those rippling effects are the vulnerability that people in the front lines have that are being violated and pushed on, right? The oppressor will always push until we fight back, and we have been fighting back, and that has been incredible. But there's a lot more work to do, and some of the people that have really been in the front lines, and I hear it from my teacher friends, and I'm sure that we have teachers here, and if you're a teacher here, thank you so much for the work you're doing. But we do know that K through 12 schools have been classified as sensitive locations, and anything that has to do with places where kids can be at is incredibly important. To maintain an eye on, because those places have been created as places that could conduct arrest if permitted to do so at this point. Um, and the Trump administration has revoked the guidance to be able to not do that. And so we really need to, one of the things that we are doing as an organization and that we're doing, that the movement is doing, is building protocols and guidelines on how to be able to take care of our kids, our schools, our playgrounds, and for kids to be able to come to the schools. I know that a lot of the teachers are having a really hard time, and we want to organize with you. There's so much room for everybody in this call to organize, and teachers really are at the center of this particular location sensitivity that has been created in the last couple of weeks. Next slide, please. Everything that I've told you about, from centuries of oppression, through making things civil, through creating paperwork to make people belong to the land that is already theirs, right? Like the stolen land, has been done through enforcement. And the way that we fight enforcement is by not allowing it to exist. So this map shows us the different types of involvement from ICE across the country in relationship to the police. So this means if there is policies that make the police be able to have a direct line with ICE and work together. In red, you can see the bad places that really are working together to violate the rights of immigrants, the international rights of immigrants. We see the yellow ones that are the places that are willing, but not necessarily like super committed. And then we see the green, where people are actively the least working with ICE. And there is a lot more protections for workers and migrants. All of these is an important understanding of what are the jargon terms that we might be using, what are the primary groups of folks that are being targeted in this particular moment in time, and how we are seeing the map of the current moment as it comes to being able to do the work of fighting back across the country. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Tristan, who will be talking a lot more about how we got here, particularly to this moment today. So Tristan, go for it.
I think it's actually Christian, but that's okay.
Christian, sorry.
That's the problem when all of our names rhyme. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Defa. So I'm gonna be going over a timeline. Don't feel like you frantically have to write down all of these dates. We will be sharing slides after the call, so mostly for folks to give some context on the timeline and how we got here. So it's super important to understand why the immigration system is actually not broken, but has evolved over the last 200 years as a way to institutionalize division, maintain cheap labor, and scapegoat people during heightened political and economic moments in time. I'll give some context again to these dates. Some patterns will emerge that are helpful to remember. 1790 was when the first statute in the US codified naturalization law, and that restricted citizenship to being a free white person. The racialization and denial of citizenship to entire classes of workers meant in practice only white male property owners could have citizenship benefits and aimed to allow for only white immigration. Between 1882 and 1924, we see one of the first significant efforts to ban immigration, limiting the amount of Chinese people who entered the country, partly due to economic resentment of Chinese laborers that were working in, the gold mines and the railroads. Pressure also from unions, though, permitted these policies to take place. So it resulted in separation of families, the creation of Chinatowns as people sort of clung to their shared culture and shared background, and fueling anti-Chinese racism. In 1942, immediately after Pearl Harbor, Japanese people, mostly Japanese Americans, were forced into internment camps. Two-thirds of the people forcibly displaced were American citizens. And it's this World War II era that also saw, of course, labor shortages due to much of the labor or the workforce deploying abroad to fight the war, resulting in the guest worker program known as the Bracero program, with an influx of Mexican nationals to take over agriculture and railroad jobs. And this ended in 1964, partly due to union pressure. Again, breeding this like competition between workers. You'll also note in 1953 was when the arbitrary 100-mile border zone was created, establishing an increased area where federal border law could apply, which is not great. And again, sort of magnifies the places where Border Patrol can really carry out their work and do that without their almost full discretion. If we can go to the next slide. Before 1965, as I mentioned, quotas heavily favored Europe, heavily favored white immigration. And it wasn't until the Immigration and Nationality Act, or the INA, that saw an end to national quotas and was really a major turning point for the racial demographics of migrants coming to the US. Briefly, you'll note in 1980, the Refugee Act limited Vietnamese refugees, again, during the Vietnam War. In 1982, the Plyler v. Doe Supreme Court case affirmed the right to public education for kindergarten through 12th grade for all children, regardless of citizenship status. This is a particularly significant Supreme Court decision, given the efforts to both defund the public education system, the voucher efforts that I know we're fighting in Texas, that people are fighting constantly, and also the revocation of schools as sensitive locations that are taking place now. So it's super important because schools have now become somewhat of a breeding ground for this extension fight. In 1986, the Immigration Reform and Control Act, IRCA, was when the I-9 form was created, establishing work authorization as sort of a thing, but also as a requirement for legal work, and dictated sanctions to employers for hiring undocumented people. 1986 was also when the amnesty was passed for 2.7 million people, including 1 million farmers, including my father. And while this is most remembered, it's worth saying that this amnesty came at the cost of more surveillance technology at the border, more staff for border enforcement, leading to increased border deaths and many workers forced into worse working conditions, and having to deal with wage death because of the sanctions. Like, it's if you're making a company pay a pretty small fine, they're going to continue to do it, or they're going to continue to exploit their workers as a way to work around these requirements. After a coup of the democratically elected Haitian government, many Haitians fled to the US to attempt to apply for asylum. Many were removed or intercepted and held at Guantanamo. So again, it's super important that we're paying attention to like what is happening across in the world, and the resulting enforcement scapegoating that tends to happen as a result of that. If we can go to the next slide. NAFTA, or the North American Free Trade Agreement, 1994, resulted in manufacturing jobs leaving the US and really exacerbated income inequality in Mexico, resulting in an increase in migration to the US. 2 years later, in 1996, IRA, or the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act, it's a mouthful, led to the creation of the 287G agreements that we talked about earlier, that establishes coordination with local law enforcement and federal officers, and in effect, commodified detention, giving local jails a profit motive to fill beds. Again, it's super important that we're keeping that in mind, because right now, ICE is saying, oh, we're at 109% capacity, we're over capacity, we don't have enough beds. So one, they are not going to be able to deport everyone if they don't have the means to do that. And they can't do that with the people that they have now, and which is why they're putting pressure on local law enforcement to be extensions of ICE, in order to be able to carry this out. IRA also established 3 and 10-year bans for anyone entering into the US without status, essentially leaving millions of people without a recourse for residency or naturalization, again, to counter the why don't they just get in line narrative. This act also reinforced the 100-mile checkpoints and expanded what offenses would be deemed deportable. Post 9/11 resulted in many major changes that fundamentally institutionalized xenophobia. The 2002 Enhanced Border Security and Visa Entry Reform Act and the National Security Entry Exit Registration System resulted in more funding for Border Patrol, created sharing of INS data and biometrics, which of course led to increased surveillance, particularly for the Muslim community. Again, post 9/11, that was the resulting policies that came into place from all of the fear mongering, from all the misinformation, from all of those harmful narratives. And in 2003, DHS, or the Department of Homeland Security, was created. I'm sure a good chunk of the people on this call right now are probably older than DHS, right? I know I am. And when DHS was created, it dissolved INS, and it dissolved into 3 immigration-related offices under the umbrella of DHS, which is USCIS, which takes care of citizenship and immigration services, CBP, which is Border Patrol, and of course ICE, and all of that giving it a $40 billion budget. If we can move to the next slide, please. This is getting to the end of our timeline here. Again, this is post 9/11. 2005's Real ID Act established security standards for driver's licenses. And while this act, again, this was 20 years ago, I was mind blown that this is 20 years ago. We're now going to see the effects of this act, with Real ID compliant IDs being required for all flights, including domestic ones, starting May 7th of this year. And that will limit the movement of anyone without a valid passport or an EAD, an employment authorization document. And while undocumented people can get driver's licenses in certain states, broadly, the lack of ID options is one of the main ways that undocumented people are identified in this country, particularly while driving, and get caught up in the broader detention system. From 2012 to 2017, there were some advancements in expanding status for individuals, particularly children who immigrated to this country prior to 2015. As we mentioned earlier, DACA is a form of prosecutorial discretion, and there were attempts to expand it to parents as well. The effort failed due to litigation brought forward by Texas and 25 other states, resulting in a federal injunction by Judge Andrew Hanen. Again, this is a name everyone should know. Judge Andrew Hanen, he fucking sucks, and later dissolved under Trump's first administration. He also rescinded DACA, and these litigation attempts have resulted in DACA only being active for renewals, but no new applications are being accepted at this time. And so, in effect, this means that the last time we saw any sweeping legislation that allowed for people to get in line was in 1986. And what I hope you take away from this timeline, even if you can't recall every act or policy that I mentioned, is that every effort was done in reaction to external events, as a way to establish a scapegoat, as a way to other people, and a group of people, to make people to establish a group of people who should be feared, both as a way to distract or hide behind the culpability of the ruling class. And this is how we got to where we are today, not with a broken immigration system, but with an immigration system that was designed intentionally year after year, fueled by racism and prejudice, oiled by the lives of millions of people that we've lost either at the border or in detention, and all to put a price on movement. This inhumane and profit-driven system is the answer that the ruling class has to those displaced by the climate crisis, by war, by economic instability. All things that the US has played a major part in across the world, and frankly, why I'm a socialist, because hatred and racism is lazy and boring. And a world where people are free, a world where people are more than their labor, that's worth fighting for. Humanization requires much more imagination and bravery. And I think a world like this is not only possible, but it's worth fighting for. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Comrade Tristan to take us through the next section.
All right, thank you so much, Christian. I'm Tristan, rhyming, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the International Migrant Rights Working Group, based in Middle Tennessee, but calling in today from Guatemala City, where I just want to share that this week, I'm meeting with organizations, civil rights organizations and worker organizations from around all of North and Central America who are planning how to resist not only the deportation regime from the US, but also how to prevent it from poisoning their relationships with each other, right? One of the things that came out of Marco Rubio's visit to Central America earlier this month was the setting up the infrastructure for concentration camps across Central America. Here in Guatemala City, about 2 miles from where I am, they're setting up tents in the Parque de la Industria. And it's beautiful to see organizations who've been fighting their own fights for so long, setting up to be able to also push back against this right-wing turn across the region. I'm going to take us further here into in the slides. If you can take me to the next slide. There is a myth. This is if you listen to the timeline, you already know the myth. But there's a myth that has been popularized, and that all immigrants are Spanish speaking. They all come from Spanish speaking countries. Maybe they're even all Mexican. These things are not true, as if you've made it this far in the call, you know well. In particular, one of the experience of Black immigrants is often erased and lumps Black immigrants together sometimes with US-born African Americans, despite often having overlapping but also profoundly different experiences, different languages, different contexts. New York, Florida, and Texas are some of the highest concentrations of Black immigrants in the country. Historically, Black immigrants have most often been born in the Caribbean, though there's, of course, Black immigrants from every region of the world, including many parts of Latin America. Including Spanish speakers, so it overlaps, right? One of the major myths, even within the recognition of the diversity of immigrants, including the existence of Black immigrants, is that overlaps with Mexican immigrants, Spanish-speaking immigrants, and so on. And of course, on top of the challenges, as we know well, as abolitionists, as racial justice activists in DSA, we know well that structural racism in the United States and in a lot of people's countries of origin compounds with this problem of exclusion based on citizenship and nationality. So it compounds with structural racism that people experience in the workplace, when trying to access social services like healthcare, in police interactions, and also in a significant way by being historically left out of a lot of the political discussions and a lot of the negotiations around immigration policy. This isn't in my notes, so I'm gonna come back to it, but there's also a lot of organizations that we can look to. There's Black Alliance for Just Immigration, there's UndocuBlack, there's also a lot of national country-based organizations. Haitian Bridge Alliance is a well-known one. That people can look to, particularly in your local areas, and thinking about how to build relationships and coalitions that don't maybe accidentally leave out a big chunk of the people who are experiencing various overlapping kinds of exclusion and violence. If you can take me to the next slide, I'm going to go to one of my favorite things to talk about, which is we're going to go through some of the things that we're helping support chapters in building out your capacities to do. The first one here is know your rights, which I think I heard described. I'd never heard of it this way before, but I think on Democracy Now, I heard heard it describes the Know Your Rights movement. I didn't know that we were part of a movement that was named that, but it is true. It is something that people are doing nationwide, including dozens of DSA chapters have been meeting their neighbors, talking to other organizations, educating their own members about what are the rights that people have, engaging with all law enforcement, including immigration law enforcement. We've done some mini trainings in our previous calls, led by Luisa Martinez from the NPC. And one of the things that we might be able to brag about a little bit, we might be a little bit proud of, is that the border czar, Ho Min, has been going around complaining that they're not able to arrest nearly as many immigrants as they planned on because of this Know Your Rights movement, because people are not answering the door, because people are watching their Ring cameras, and when they see a guy in a police vest with a mask on and khaki pants, they're just like, I'm not home, because people have been preparing for what to do in those situations. So I'm going to give you, it says this on the screen. We all have constitutional rights. Everybody has constitutional rights regardless of immigration status. And it is important to remember, if we don't know what those rights are, ICE is not going to respect them for us, just like no cop will. So we need to remind each other of them and train each other, train ourselves in the mirror if we need to do that. When I was first trained on these, we made up songs and we chanted them one after another in order to burn it into our brains. In our case, it went, I would like to remain silent. I would like to see my lawyer. Oh yeah, oh yeah. That's just an example. We can make these things fun. We can also make them memorable. And it's important that we find ways of doing so. That was off script, the song. I'm going to give you 5 important principles here of Know Your Rights. The first one is you do not have to open your door if an immigration agent is knocking. In fact, it's the safest response, and it's what's keeping most people safe. This is true of houses. This is true of vehicles. If the immigration agent has a signed judicial warrant to get into your house and they want to get in, they will find a way in. You don't have to solve that problem for them. You can ask them to slide the paperwork underneath the door. You can see if a judge signed it. Almost never do they actually have this. They almost always have something that looks like a UPS packing slip that's just signed by a supervisor, which does not give them the right to knock your door down. 2, you have the right to remain silent. I feel like I want to give a moment for everybody to practice singing it in the mirror, but we won't do that on mic. But it is the most obvious mistake. One statistic I heard last week that I think is really useful is that ICE agents have, I think it's 60 hours of training in how to get you to talk, which is to say how to get you to open the door without wanting to, how to get you to give information without thinking that you are. And so many people, once they start talking, are like, oh, well, I already gave up something. I guess I'll just keep talking. They are trained in this, and all they want to do is get your mouth moving and continue to say things that you do not need to say. So remember, you have the right to remain silent. 3rd, you have the right to speak to a lawyer. It's the easiest response if you want to remain silent is, I'm calling my lawyer. You don't have to say anything else. If you need to say a phrase, just say, I want to see my lawyer. You don't have to have a lawyer. You want to see them. Number 4, if you're stopped by police, it's useful to clarify, are they just stopping you because they got questions, or are you actually detained? A lot of the time you're neither. A lot of the time you're not detained. They're simply asking you questions and trying to fish for probable cause. So easiest question to ask is just, am I free to leave? Am I being detained? If you're being detained, they will tell you. If you're not being detained, walk away. 5th, record your interactions. Police sometimes hate it, though they're often used to it. Record it, it keeps you safe. I don't think we need to go into too much more about it, other than it keeps you safe in terms of cop behavior. It keeps you safe in terms of being able to share with the public when ICE breaks the law or when other cops break the law. And it also keeps you safer if you need that evidence to show that they broke the law in order to arrest you, or they broke the law and violated your rights in the process. This is something that you might want to use in your defense. Okay, if you can take me to the next slide. Going to ICE Watch, I'm going to go quicker, which is just that bad information doesn't help anyone. It's a huge tactic of this administration in the strategy they're using, which is to try to impress everybody and to try to project a much bigger operational capacity than ICE really has. They have 6,000 agents currently. They do not have 7,000. They have enough agents to do a certain amount of activity and not more. If you're not sure if it's ICE, you posting on Facebook, hey, I think I saw ICE at the Walmart, freaks people out. It disrupts people's everyday shopping. It might send them into a panic for days. It's not helping anybody unless you're able to verify. So we suggest being part of these verification networks. And those verification networks exist in a lot of your cities. If they don't yet, hit us up. We're willing to help train people in this process. How do you get together with other organizations and build coalitions to verify information and make it good and useful to people? There's 5 here on the slide. You can see that it should be specific. It should give a location, right? It should give a date and time. It should describe what you're seeing. It should include a photo or a video, and it should describe what's happening. Did they arrest somebody? Are they just ordering tacos? What's happening here? Those are the sorts of things. I'm a hotline operator on an ICE Watch program in Middle Tennessee. These are the things that we ask the dozen people a day who send in tips. We say, cool, can you go back to the person you heard this from and get these 5 things? Because we're not going to publish it if it's just a rumor. Okay, take us to the next one. This is just a reminder that ICE not only is allowed to lie, but ICE lies on purpose as part of their PR strategy. They often will we should be ready for them to put out lists of people with all kinds of charges, in certain jurisdictions even. They'll hide people, they'll pretend that they have different charges when they don't. They'll, in this case, they'll manipulate people's family information, say that they don't have family when they do. Sometimes their system is just a huge mess, and sometimes they're intentionally manipulating, which they're allowed to do for public relations purposes. One of the things to remember is they also try to hide a lot of this stuff. Right now, they're embedding journalists within ICE patrols. But you might have noticed they're not letting lawyers go visit the people that are being transferred to Guantanamo Bay. 150 lawyers just sent a letter yesterday asking for access. So ICE lies and they hide people. And it's one of the most important things that we can do is to try to break through the distance and the barriers that they put between people who are entering their custody and control and the rest of society. We need to maintain those forms of communication. Take us to the next slide. We can keep going. And I'm just going to brag for a moment on, we're not going to showcase chapters tonight because we don't have time, and that's not what we said we were going to do. But I just want to say we have dozens of chapters. I think we have about 65 chapters that have reached out to us so far saying we want to do this work. We have already started or we want to begin. And just give a few examples of the kinds of things we're hearing. We're hearing dozens of chapters doing know your rights work, either internally or going out with partner organizations and handing out cards or flyers, telling people you don't got to talk to cops, you can stay silent, you don't got to open the door, this is what a judicial warrant looks like. People training, sometimes those trainings are 5 hours long, sometimes they're 5 minutes long. Tons of chapters are doing this right now. It's pissing ICE off, keep it up. Second, we're hearing some chapters moving in, especially in coordination with other local organizations, moving into ICE Watch programs. If you're interested in that, we've heard from a lot of chapters that are like, how do we start? How do we do it? I just gave you like a 3-minute version. It's also in our toolkit to our chapter organizing toolkit. You can see the information there of some ideas to get started, but you can also hit us up for training or to think about who might we want to do this with. I heard some really exciting things from Charlottesville. Shout out Charlottesville, who's thinking with other organizations locally about how to add capacity to existing community ICE Watch hotlines. I've been hearing from Nashville, where I live, DSA members throwing down in a similar way, supporting community hotlines and verification processes. Been hearing from New York, been hearing from San Diego. If you're interested in ICE Watch, hit us up. We've been hearing about sanctuary policy. Los Angeles, back in November, passed a really simple and really powerful sanctuary policy. We're hearing about statewide sanctuary policies, like hearing from chapters across New York about the Dignity Not Detention bill that DSA members are taking to the General Assembly in New York. We're also hearing from a lot of chapters, and we want to hear even more of this, people incorporating immigrant rights work into the workplace and tenant organizing that they're doing, into the healthcare organizing that they're doing, into the Green New Deal organizing that they're doing, into the transit, universal transit organizing they're doing, recognizing that the scapegoating of immigrants is currently one of the most powerful tools of the right wing to make us lose the things that we could otherwise win for everybody. So we're hearing chapters thinking about that, trying to wrap their mind around this is poisonous and it's stopping us from winning. In New York, trying to get social housing, the mayor is saying the reason you don't have housing is because of the immigrants. They're saying the same thing, and politicians, both Republican and Democrat, are saying the same thing across the country. And chapters are saying, what is the way that we can fight back on this and recognize that only by incorporating an understanding of immigrant rights into the rest of our organizing are we going to get wins for everybody. And then I'm just going to say, hey, North Jersey and a bunch of others moving towards trying to actually shut down the infrastructure or prevent the infrastructure of detention. Right now, we're seeing threats of the expansion of detention all over the country, and chapters are trying to figure out, in some places, how do we catch them in the zoning process, catch them in the permitting or the licensing process? How do we pass laws refusing to let them use state or local infrastructure for detention? How do we close intergovernmental service agreements that allow ICE to use local county jail beds for payment to house immigrants? All of these different kinds of ways of fighting the expansion of detention infrastructure. Okay, I said I wasn't going to brag on individual chapters. I guess I did. We'll give you all a chance soon in future trainings to showcase your own work, to be able to come and say some of the dilemmas and the difficulties of that as well. So now I'm going to finish and pass back to Marilia for our closing today.
Thank you, Tristan. Hi, everybody. My name is Marielia. I use she, they pronouns. I'm in San Diego, and I'm the other co-chair of the working group. And yeah, can we go to the next slide, please? I am just like super, I don't know, just like inspired, I guess is the word, hearing about whatever all the other what chapters across the country are working on. And I really appreciate Tristan's hyping up of all the chapters. DSA is doing some really powerful organizing and serious organizing in coalition with organizations and communities. And although, you know, we may not see it in the news or even on the web very much, this real organizing on the ground that's happening. And I'm like super proud to be a part of DSA and doing this work. And I'm so excited to have more chapters take on this work and continue this work in solidarity with everybody. So I'm just going to start closing out the call, but going to talk a little bit about DSA, specifically socialists' strategy on immigration. So bottom line, solidarity is the solution. We can't just talk about class or just race. We have to acknowledge that both are structures that affect how we think about organizing. Obviously, there's a lot to say here on this topic. There's a lot of debate. And so I won't be able to get too into it, but if you're interested in really doing some reading about class and race and the intersection and each one. Yes, intersectionalism. I highly suggest like checking out Ruth Wilson Gilmore or Olufemi Taiwo or Robin Kelly. These are all writers that like have amazing, articles and books on these issues. But yeah, basically, Harsha Walia, yeah. So divide and conquer. There are really powerful forces that want to forcefully and violently maintain the status quo. And they use these, the divide and conquer strategy to create distrust in our movements and to break them apart. One example is that you can read online and learn more about like what happened in this country in the 50s and 60s and 70s with COINTELPRO, which was the American, the FBI, that was, projects that were made to surveil, infiltrate, discredit, and disrupt political organizations in our country that were gaining power in that time and that were really powerful and disrupting the status quo at the time. And that included, like the anti-Vietnam movement, the war movement, and the American Indian movement, and the Young Lords, which, and the Black Panther Party. Like this was like the original, the Rainbow Coalition, like the original Solidarity back in the day. So that's just, something to be aware of as we're organizing that, anytime we get a little bit of power, there's always going to be people trying to, tear us apart and use very, 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 like good methods, I guess, to do it. Like very, just very sophisticated methods is what I meant to say. So yeah, fighting the fear, fighting the system, we have to fight together. That is what we have to do. Solidarity is the only solution and the only way we build density, we build power in our unions, where we live, where we work. And that includes winning guarantees of housing for transit, like Tristan was saying, healthcare, and dignity in the workplace. So next slide, please. These are some of the ways, just a few of the methods that organizations and including chapters in DSA are fighting back against what's happening. These were talked about in a lot of detail in the call, but basically a lot of orgs are staffing like defense hotlines, or volunteers are also staffing these where people can call in and report if they've seen ICE in their area, which could include an ICE Watch program, which is like a bigger kind of volunteer or staff run networks to verify if you've seen ICE in your communities. There's a lot that can be done. There's like solidarity funds, working on policy in your city. It really depends on where you are, what city and state. Know your rights trainings, so that folks know what rights you have, and to feel strong, and confident in those rights. So yeah, that's all to say, look up what work is happening in your city, in your town. You may have community groups or organizations in your area that are already doing this work. Look them up, go to a meeting, ask how you can help, and then show up, and then show up again and keep showing up. Yeah, next slide, please. These are just a couple of the interventions that we touched on that folks are working on, including in chapters. So some of the ways, just a few of the ways that we can stop or slow down immigration enforcement in the following areas, which is like, our daily lives. So like in schools, teachers are coming together to support students, to educate each other on what everybody's rights are when it comes to interacting with immigration, customs enforcement, and law enforcement. churches, places of worship, all places that education can happen and people can work together to know their rights and to protect the community. Next slide, please. Workplaces. So knowing your rights in the workplace, unions and certain industries, working on negotiating language that can maybe go into a new union contract for immigrant protection. Those are all things that we can do on a day-to-day. Next slide, please. And housing, so where we live, our neighbors, our apartment complexes. Again, getting to know your neighbors, making a plan together, coming together, knowing your rights. One example that I saw in the news recently that other people may have seen was in Aurora in Denver, this just like incredible display of just solidarity and planning and knowing your rights and just like community love. Yeah, they stopped. They had like a big ice raid that was planned. There were a lot of Venezuelan immigrants in this apartment complex, and neighbors all came together. I mean, these are relationships that have already, had already been standing, but yeah, and just like knowing your rights, and then ICE wasn't able to detain anybody. It was just a beautiful, beautiful thing that happened there, and I'm sure it's happening in other places too. Next slide, please. So yeah, just gonna drop. So we are gonna share the slides with everybody, and there's just like really just a handful of links here. There's so many resources on the internet, like really just, look up your city and know your rights. And there's so many organizations doing this work, but these are just a few. So red cards, which we've already talked about, which are super prolific and important, and they're printed in so many languages. You can print them at home, you can have them printed at a print shop, and distributed in your community. A couple of links just for knowing your rights, from a couple of well-known and trustworthy sources, from the Immigrant Defense Project, United We Dream, and the Workers' Rights Arise in Chicago for worker, know your rights and union stuff like that. And then just a link for a couple of legal terms for folks who want to fill that knowledge gap there. Next one. Next slide, please. We do have one last poll that we're gonna drop, I think, right now. Or do we? Okay, here we go. Yeah, just want to kind of hear what folks are looking for in this call. So go ahead and fill this out. And yeah, if you're not in DSA, highly, highly recommend you join. We will be dropping that link in the chat to join DSA if you're not in DSA yet. And if you are in DSA and want to do this work, we will also be dropping the link to join our working group, the International Migrant Rights Working Group. Okay, amazing. I mean, it's looking a lot like there's quite a few folks on this call who want help, and are in chapters and want to learn how to do this. I wonder if we can share the chapter link. And we are also going to be dropping the toolkit for this work. Tristan's dropping it in the chat right now. So go ahead and save all those links. That's really cool though. Really cool that a lot of people here are looking to do this work locally. So yeah, check out the toolkit. It's a starter, to doing this work in your chapter, but definitely reach out to us, join the working group. Yeah, and we will reach out to get you connected to this work in your chapter. Yeah, so if you haven't already, some of the things you can do is just create a new working group or committee in your chapter, expand some of the work that's already happening, or incorporate some of the tactics into an existing strategy in your chapter. And I'm going to go to the next slide, which is just to close us out. So yeah, go ahead. We will be sending the slides and the recording out if you registered for the call. And I just want to thank everybody for being here. I hope this was helpful and enlightening, and this, a basics kind of filling in the gaps for some knowledge here. And I just want to say that, we're only going to get through this together, showing up for each other and acting in solidarity. So solidarity, everybody, and make sure you join DSA if you're not a member. Show up for your community, and I'll see y'all on the streets and in the next call. So have a good night, everyone.